Well, good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight, the Campus Craziness Edition. As a country, we invest a tremendous amount of money and power in our higher education system. We count on our universities to train future leaders who will, we hope, preserve the freedoms that built and sustained our country over hundreds of years. But is that happening? How well are those freedoms being preserved on campuses? That's the subject of tonight's show, a special hour-long edition of Campus Craziness. Now, no campus represents the shift more vividly than UC Berkeley. In the 60s, Berkeley was the heart of the free speech movement. Now, things are very different. Troy Warden is a student at Berkeley and also works as a correspondent for Campus Reform. We talked to him recently about the current intellectual climate at his school. So you went and spoke directly to the so-called anti-fascists. What did they say when you talked to them?
Well, Tucker, thank you for having me on. And I just want to let my story be known. I went to this meeting because I wanted to have these anti-fascists own up to the violence they've perpetrated and permitted against our club. And I, quite frankly, called them out. I asked them to simply condemn the violence that's been perpetrated against the Berkeley College Republicans. And their response was, quite frankly, very disappointing. They failed to even acknowledge that it occurred. The person, the leader of Refuse Fascism, Sunsara Taylor, said that she didn't even know of the occurrences. And this is completely unacceptable because I've gone on the media multiple times. She's been on this program before. And I've written about this on campusreform.org multiple times. We've had members punched in the face. We've had members spat at, pepper sprayed. I was almost beaten up during the February 1st Milo Yiannopoulos riots. And she refused to acknowledge them and actually said not all violence is equal. She suggested to her supporters that in some cases violence is completely acceptable if someone disagrees with you.
And she said the same thing on this show pretty clearly. Do you get any sense that they're calling themselves anti-fascists ironically? Here you have people dressed in costume committing violence against people whose politics they disagree with, and they're anti-fascists. I mean, are they serious when they say that?
Well, partly, but also partly not. You know, these groups are receiving funding from persons such as George Soros. Yeah. This, quite frankly, is exactly the kind of line that they are going to pull because it's going to get them a lot of funding from very liberal donors. So if they take a very strong stance against Mr. Trump and his supporters and they label them fascists and they go out onto the streets and commit political terrorism, physically intimidate and verbally intimidate conservative students on campuses and other Trump supporters in the streets, then I think it's the best way for them to receive the amount of funding they want.
It's grotesque that anyone would be funding political violence, but people are, as we've noted often on this show. Now, what is Berkeley as an institution doing to protect you? They're all about safe spaces. Your space does not seem very safe to me.
Well, that's the ironic thing. The Berkeley College Republicans have never and will never ask for a safe space. But many other groups have. Black Lives Matter, for instance, blocked white students specifically from going to class in protest. They had a whole list of demands, including safe spaces. But the Berkeley College Republicans have simply asked the city of Berkeley, the administrators of the University of California, Berkeley, and the UC Police Department to simply protect our rights, to give us the proper amount of personnel and security. And instead of doing that, they slap very large security fees on us, usually over $5,000 for a conservative speaker. And then when rioters do show up, when violence is perpetrated, when threats of violence are made, they either have their security and police and peace officers stand down, or, in fact, they cancel our event even before we're able to put them on. So in all these cases, what you've seen is high-profile and even low-profile conservative speakers prevented from speaking on campus because the university is too cowardly to defend their mantle, the mantle they proudly proclaim every chance they get, which is the birthplace of the free speech movement. And like I wrote on the night of February 1st, I said the free speech movement is dead. The very birthplace of the free speech movement is also its grave.
Wow. I don't have anything to add to that other than how old are you?
I am 21. I just turned 21.
Man, I was nowhere near as articulate or as brave as you are when I was 21. I'm impressed. Trey, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, UC Berkeley may be the most visibly nutty campus, but the mania has spread just about everywhere in the country. We've had a lot of students on this show from all over who have pretty remarkable ideas about how they ought to conduct themselves on campus. From vandals to socialists to segregationists, here are some of our favorite student guests in the past few months. You need to be allowed to say what you think, and what you think doesn't have to be popular or constructive or polite for you to be allowed to say. You have an absolute right to express your views, period.
You're right.
Do they not teach?
Right.
Okay, and that would include whiteboards, no? I mean, it's kind of simple.
The idea of freedom of speech is essential to our country. That's literally what our country was founded on.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that you can disagree with somebody and have that conversation, that's really good.
Student.
But I will say there's Tucker, let me finish here. There's a difference between you expressing a view and then you providing intimidation and harassment to another student.
So it seems to me if you're going to ban whiteboards, why stop there? Why not ban pens and keyboards and other instruments of divergent opinion and just kind of suppress speech and everyone would be happy? You're a pretty articulate person with a precise command of the language, and presumably in an article this long you could explain exactly what that action, what form it would take. And in this case you said it takes flipping cars over. And my point is, someone paid for those cars. Like, those aren't your cars. And to destroy other people's property to make your political point isn't really a valid path, is it?
Well, first of all, they flipped cars when the Cubs won. But secondly, Tucker, I mean, so I think that, yeah, it's an article, and I exaggerated. But, I mean, I'm trying to explain now what I think I actually mean by political action that doesn't consist in sort of sanitized or moderated Q&A sessions or bipartisan roundtables at the Institute of Politics.
Can you name a single example where a speaker has been physically prevented from speaking by conservative students?
I know basically that Barack Obama and Alice Walker have been sort of denied, or at least attempted.
They were not stopped from speaking. Nobody put their bodyguards in the hospital. Nobody threw rocks against the building or pounded on the windows. Conservative students have not, that I'm aware of, and I would denounce it immediately if they did, stopped any speaker, and yet you see it on the left, and yet your piece doesn't say one word about that. I wonder why. I would defend the right of anybody to say something I disagree with, and you ought to too, and especially as a college student, and I think you're still a college student.
I'm a graduate student, and I actually
You're
teach.
a graduate student, you teach, then you're in a world that was created specifically to protect people who have non-mainstream opinions.
But that space does not protect everybody. Let's be clear about that.
Apparently it doesn't. It doesn't protect people you disagree with.
Does it protect people who advocate killing cops? Do you think that will go well? If someone wanted to go and speak on a college campus,
First of all,
a tour that said that talked
the time.
Really? I really want to know. I really want to know where there's anybody.
Have you been to a Black Lives Matter protest?
Absolutely not. I support Black Lives Matter. I would never support Black Lives Matter if they advocated killing a police officer.
Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
Right? So if I were to go to a rally and people said, I'm just pulling this out of thin air, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon, about police officers advocating the killing of cops. I mean, you would say that's unacceptable. That should not be allowed. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if student group wants to have a discussion about police brutality or racism.
If they were to use that phrase, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
I'm not interested in a phrase. I'm not going to debate you over this phrase should be allowed or not.
Because you have no principles. That's why. Because all the things you've been saying for the last 11 minutes are totally untrue.
And I came here because I thought I would get the same respect from you.
You just revealed who you are. You're basically saying the flag represents evil to the extent that it shouldn't be flown. And my question is, why is it always rich kids who make that point? Why is it always kids from a $62,000 a year college like Hampshire who are making that point? None of the workers who you claim to be representing ever say that. You never see anybody at a trade school burning the American flag. Have you noticed that? I'm not making this up in my mind, am I?
I think that you're more likely to pick up a story in which rich kids do burn a flag on the basis that we have more access to the media. I mean, like, the flag burning wasn't
really. So you think it's like your average HVAC repair school, they're burning the flag?
Well, I believe,
there is something
as you and me both know,
that,
the politics of this country are divided by class.
What if a bunch of, like, straight white kids got together and said, you know, we feel oppressed here by people perhaps like you, Sean, and we need our own student-sponsored, school-paid-for room to gather with just straight white guys, would you say, I get that, that's okay? Or would you not?
I think that given the data that we have around suicide and the pressing needs of our community and the limited space that we have, there are other ways in which that space can be used.
Oh, so no, in other words, so it's a double standard. So certain races get their own rooms and others don't, is
No,
what you're saying.
no, what I'm saying is that we're reacting to needs and we're providing support for communities that have demonstrated those needs.
But what you're doing is using imprecise, silly academic talk to dodge my question. So let me just ask you,
not at all.
Let me ask you one more time.
I can't think of anything more real than suicide, Tucker.
Well, I'm not denying the reality of suicide.
Well, I know. You said I was using academic talk. I'm not doing that at all.
No, I'm contesting your assumption about what causes suicide.
No,
you
don't think that isolationism causes suicide?
I don't know what isolationism is. It's actually a foreign policy term here in Washington.
So,
I guess it means not being around people who
when
are
I say
like
isolation, yeah, I mean feeling, cutting yourself off, not feeling like you have a community. Sure, but there are differences among these communities.
Let's get deeper here. So you're saying that people are more comfortable, maybe have better mental health when they're around people who are just like them. And I'm saying
I feel like
maybe that's true, but it's kind of a radical thing to say because that, of course, again, was what the people who supported segregation said. There is massive unemployment in the middle of the country, massive, and a higher rate for men than during the Great Depression. If you bring in more workers, will there be more or less employment? There will be less employment, more people competing for fewer jobs. This is basic economics. How can you as a socialist be for that?
What we need is jobs programs, and the reality is that appointing a CEO. What the reality is that appointing a CEO of Goldman Sachs as our finance advisor, somebody who rejects the concept of the minimum wage.
Look, I'm taking you seriously, and you're just repeating dumb liberal talking points. Be a socialist. Be a radical. Open your mind. I'm serious. You're not a socialist. You're a lifestyle liberal. That's upset about the same